The bank doors hissed open at exactly 9:03 a.m., but no one noticed the old man who stepped inside. His coat was frayed at the cuffs, boots worn smooth, and his steps slow but certain, like someone who'd spent a lifetime walking roads no one else could see. Walter Dean didn't carry a phone, didn't check the time. All he had was a small brass key on a chain and a folded envelope tucked into the inside pocket of his coat. He wasn't there to make a withdrawal. He came for something that had been locked away for over 4 decades, something the world forgot, but he never could. The young teller glanced up, barely registering him. Just another senior citizen. But when Walter reached the counter and whispered, "I'm here for box 72C," something barely perceptible shifted in the room. Not panic, not awe. Just a flicker, like history had walked in, and no one was ready. Stay with us until the very end, because what happens next will make you rethink how we honor silence, sacrifice, and memory. Don't forget to subscribe, and tell us in the comments, where are you watching from, and what time is it right now in your part of the world? Walter Dean had once been known by another name, Walt the Ghost. Not because he disappeared, but because of where he appeared. In jungles without names, under skies without stars, deep in the shadows of places the government never claimed. He wasn't a trigger man. He didn't kick down doors. He drew maps, by hand, on the ground, in the dark, with trembling charcoal fingers that traced rivers, bunkers, and minefields where GPS signals never reached. It was 1971 when his name was first penciled into a deployment roster marked Classified, Tiger Recon. Not for combat, not directly. Walt was what the team called their walker. He went ahead with nothing but a compass, sketchpad, and sixth sense sharpened by fear. He didn't just map terrain, he read it like it spoke to him, wrote danger into curves and shadows. Every line on his maps had saved lives, including one life he never told anyone about. A life he still owed a promise to. After the war, Walter vanished intentionally. He never returned to base for honors, never went to reunions, never filed claims. The war had taken too much and left too little. What was left of him preferred silence. He settled in a forgotten corner of Virginia, repairing watches at a dusty roadside shop, keeping time for strangers while letting his own memories rust. But there was one thing he never let go of. Box 72C. It was stored at First Patriot Bank back when the building was still named Liberty, Sons Trust. Inside that metal box was the original map that saved an entire Special Forces unit pinned down near the Laotian border. The same map he'd drawn after crawling through 3 miles of mud and barbed jungle with a shattered wrist and a fever that nearly killed him. He never asked what they used it for. Never followed up on the mission's outcome. Just handed it to a faceless officer and limped away. But now, nearly 50 years later, Walter had a reason to see that map again. A letter had arrived 3 weeks earlier from a museum curator at the U.S. Army Heritage Foundation. They were compiling final archives for a declassified exhibit titled Legacy Cartography, Maps That Changed Wars. Somehow someone had traced a story back to him. No one knew the full tale, no one but Walt, and the man whose life had once depended on it. So, on that quiet Thursday morning, Walter pressed the brass key into his palm and walked 3 miles to the bank. Not because he didn't own a car, he did, but because walking helped him think, helped him feel the weight of every step, every ghost. He wore his old field jacket under his wool coat. No medals, no insignias, just a stitched patch on the inside hem. TR-17 Tiger Recon, Unit 17, faded but intact. As he waited in line behind customers with cell phones, coffee cups, and half-finished conversations, he didn't rush. He'd lived long enough to know patience was the only currency that never devalued. When it was finally his turn, he stepped forward, placed both hands on the counter like it was an altar, and said in a low, clear voice, "My name is Walter Dean. I have a safety deposit box here, number 72C. I'm ready to open it." The teller, no older than 23, blinked as if hearing something outside of protocol. Walter said nothing more. Because in his world, you didn't need to say much. You just needed to remember where you were when no one else did. The teller his name tag read. Connor tilted his head slightly. I'm sorry, sir. Did you say 72C? Walter nodded once. Yes. Safety deposit. I have the key. He held it up an old brass cylinder with an etched triangle and two faded initials. LT. Connor glanced at the key like it was part of a prank, then offered a polite but clearly forced smile. Okay. Give me just a second. He tapped on the screen. Then again. His brow furrowed. I'm not seeing anything connected to your name, he said slowly, his voice a shade too loud now. Walter slid a folded document across the counter. A notarized receipt from 1981, the last time he'd accessed the box. Connor didn't touch it. Instead, he looked toward the glass office behind him, where a younger man in a navy blazer sat scrolling through his phone. Mr. Doyle, Connor called. The man looked up, slicked hair, blazer too tight around the shoulders, tie patterned with little red whales. He sighed, stood, and walked over with visible reluctance. What's the problem? Doyle asked, already annoyed. This gentleman's asking for access to a safety deposit box 72, but I'm not finding an account match. Doyle scanned Walter with the quick, dismissive glance of someone used to being right. Do you have ID, sir? Walter reached into his coat and pulled out a worn leather wallet. Inside were 2 photo IDs, a veteran's card, and a typed letter from the bank's old archive department authorizing him long ago. He placed them in a neat row. Doyle glanced at them, then laughed not kindly. These look like they were printed on a typewriter. They were, Walter said calmly. Connor laughed. Do you remember which war, sir? Walter didn't answer. He just pressed his hand flat over the documents, like grounding them in something unshakable. Doyle leaned in. Sir, you're telling me you've had a box here since what, Nixon? I'm sorry, but we have procedures, accounts that old need corporate verification. It's very easy for people to show up with old documents and think they have access. Walter straightened just slightly. I'm not here by mistake. Doyle's tone sharpened. Look, I've had guys come in claiming to be Navy SEALs, CIA, you name it. Half of them bought their stories off eBay. So unless you've got more than a dusty key and a fantasy, I suggest you leave before we have to call someone. Connor snorted. Maybe the History Channel. That drew a few chuckles from customers nearby. One woman whispered something to her teenage son, who giggled into his hoodie. A man filming a mobile deposit turned his phone a few degrees, now subtly recording. Walter didn't flinch. He reached into his coat pocket, not quickly, not forcefully, and pulled out a small black case. He opened it gently and placed the contents on the counter. A weathered field watch, stainless steel, cracked face. But on the leather strap, clearly embossed and faded by age, was a tiger emblem coiled around a compass. Connor squinted. Is that a cartoon? Doyle smirked. Another prop? It's a unit insignia, Walter said softly. TR-17, Tiger Recon. Doyle looked unimpressed. Never heard of it. That's the point, Walter replied. But Doyle was already waving over a security guard, young, built, eager. Jared, can you walk this gentleman out? He's confused. The guard hesitated, glancing at the old man and his soft-spoken dignity. Sir, he said, voice quiet, would you mind stepping outside with me? Walter looked at him, not angry, not bitter, just tired. He gently collected the watch, the ID, the folded paper, and his key. Then he turned, walked slowly to a bench near the window, and sat down. No scene, no raised voice, no protest, just silence, and the sudden discomfort of everyone who had laughed. For a moment, the only sound in the bank was the soft buzz of fluorescent lighting. Walter Dean sat perfectly still on the bench by the window, hands resting over the brass key in his lap. His eyes didn't move. Not toward the guard, not toward the manager still whispering under his breath. To the others, He looked like an old man lost in thought. But Elena Morales saw something different. She'd been waiting behind the kiosk counter to finalize a wire transfer for a defense subcontractor, business as usual. But when she saw the man with the key and the field watch get humiliated, something flickered deep in her memory. That emblem. The tiger curled around the compass. She'd seen it before. 2 years ago, at a closed-door briefing at Fort Carson, a retired Delta Force captain had passed around a worn mission map from an unacknowledged recon team during Indochina. In the corner of that map was a faint stamped 17, same tiger, same curve. He called the map a gift from a ghost. And now, that same ghost was sitting 10 feet away, being mocked by kids in lanyards. Elena's hands curled into fists at her side. Doyle, meanwhile, was pacing again. He turned to the guard. "Why is he still here?" The guard hesitated. "He's not causing a disturbance, sir." "That's not the point." Doyle's voice rose, sharp and performative. "You give someone like that an inch, and next thing you know, they're live streaming. These guys live for pity claim PTSD, show some trinket, get a GoFundMe link going." Connor chuckled again, too loudly. "Bet he doesn't even know what a VPN is." A few more snickers followed. Walter didn't move. He simply adjusted the sleeve of his coat with slow, deliberate care. But Elena had heard enough. She stepped out from behind the kiosk, heels clicking cleanly across the tile. Her posture was exact, shoulders back, chin lifted, eyes locked forward. Years in Air Force logistics had taught her how to enter a room with purpose. She walked straight to the counter, stopping between Doyle and the security guard. "Excuse me," she said clearly. Doyle blinked. "Can I help you?" "No," she said. "But I can help him." She turned and pointed directly to Walter. "I believe that man is who he says he is." Connor scoffed. "You know him?" "I know that emblem," she said coolly. "And I know better than to laugh at it." Doyle folded his arms. "Ma'am, this really doesn't concern you." She stepped closer. "It does now." Behind them, a few customers were watching more openly now. One woman lowered her phone, the humor drained from her eyes. Another, a man with a Marine Corps sticker on his laptop, quietly stood up from his seat. Elena pulled out her phone and began dialing, not frantically deliberately, with the precision of someone who knew exactly who she was calling. "I'm reporting a possible mishandling of classified military property," she said aloud, not caring who heard. "And I'm requesting verification of a retired TR-17 mapmaker believed to be present." Doyle stiffened. "You're making a scene." "No," she said. "You already did." The line picked up. Elena turned away from the counter, voice lowering as she spoke. Behind the glass wall, an older employee, gray-haired, forgotten by the fast-moving world of digital banking, paused. He'd been watching the scene unfold quietly, but now he turned to look at a plaque mounted on the wall. "Liberty, Sons Trust, Vault Dedication, 1979. He ran his fingers down the names. And there, near the bottom, one name was etched deeper than the rest. W.D. Walter Dean. The man who had helped oversee the original construction of the bank's underground vaults under contract from the Army Corps of Engineers. Before it was a bank, it had been something else entirely. A depot. A classified one. The old employee picked up the landline and dialed a number he hadn't used in 20 years. He said only 5 words. "The tiger's awake. He's here." Then he hung up. Back at the bench, Walter Dean remained motionless. Outside the glass, the American flag shifted in the wind, its edges worn from sun and time. Walter's eyes didn't leave it. Not because of patriotism or ritual. He'd stopped saluting symbols a long time ago. He watched it because it reminded him of something steady, something that didn't flinch even when everyone else did. Inside the bank, the mood had shifted. What began as amusement had hardened into unease. Elena Morales stood a few paces away, her voice low and sharp as she delivered coordinates, unit numbers, and verification terms into the phone. No one dared interrupt her now. The words, "Tiger Recon," echoed faintly off the marble walls, and the moment they did, even the security guard stopped pretending to patrol. Behind the counter, Doyle's confidence began to fray. He tried to regain composure. What? So he's some Cold War legend now? Why isn't anyone here with him then? Huh? Eleanor turned to him slowly. Because people like him don't travel with entourages. They travel with ghosts. Before Doyle could respond, the old employee Harold, his name stitched in fading red on his vest, emerged from the office. He held no tablet, no clipboard. Just a dusty binder, and a look on his face like he was walking into a memory. He didn't go to Walter. He went to the service elevator. With a key only he and two retired directors still possessed, Harold opened the rusted control panel, flipped a switch, and tapped in a code no one had used in over 30 years. Somewhere beneath their feet, the building hummed, not loudly, but differently. A low, mechanical breath like something old waking up. And 50 miles away, inside a secure room beneath a military installation in Fort Cumberland, an alert lit up on a console labeled Vault Protocol, Dean Access Request. Major General Douglas Reeve was in the middle of a strategy call when the red light blinked. A junior officer leaned in, whispered something. Reeve's hand stopped mid-air. He looked at the screen, then again. Dean, W, TR-17. Clear the room, he said instantly. The room emptied without a word. Reeve picked up a black receiver, one of the few remaining direct landlines linked to National Archive intelligence. His voice dropped into something colder, older. Confirm the location. First Patriot Bank, Alexandria, came the response. Reeve stood slowly, walked to the corner of his office where a framed map hung. It wasn't decorative, it was hand-drawn. Black ink, mud stains along the edges. The original had saved him once in a clearing near Namjiang, drawn by someone with broken fingers and a compass salvaged from a crashed Huey. Tell them I'm inbound, he said. Have the coin ready. He didn't explain. He didn't need to. Back at the bank, Doyle turned toward Elena again, trying to recover ground. Whatever you think you're doing, this isn't protocol. It's just a safety deposit box. Eleanor's voice was razor-sharp. Then why is the Department of Defense on their way? Connor's eyes widened. Wait. Seriously? Before Doyle could respond, his earpiece chirped. A private bank line, he answered, mumbled a greeting, then went pale. He turned toward the windows just as the sound of black tires screeched outside. A dark SUV rolled to a stop. No sirens, no flashing lights. Just presence. And the man who stepped out wore stars on his shoulders. The front doors of First Patriot Bank didn't just open. They were parted. With a calculated push, the kind that didn't ask for attention but commanded it. General Douglas Reeve stepped inside like a storm in uniform boots, polished to mirror sheen, chest lined with medals that hadn't been displayed since the last war room briefing at the Pentagon. His uniform was immaculate, but it was his gazer level, deliberate, searching, that made the air inside the bank constrict. No one spoke. Phones were lowered. Conversations died mid-sentence. The silence wasn't forced. It was instinct. Behind the general, two aides followed, one carrying a locked case, the other holding a sealed envelope. Walter Dean remained seated by the window, unmoved by the shift in atmosphere, until Reeve spoke. Sir, he said loud, clear, reverent. Colonel Dean. Walter blinked. No one had called him that in decades. Slowly, he turned, met Reeve's eyes, and without hesitation stood. The general snapped to attention, then saluted with precise sharpness. Walter returned the salute, not with fanfare, but with the grace of a man who'd never forgotten how. Connor's jaw dropped. Doyle, still frozen behind the counter, opened his mouth but found no words. For the first time since Walter Dean had walked in, he wasn't the one in control of the room. Reeve stepped forward, closing the distance between them. TR-17, he said softly. Recon cartographer. Laotian corridor. June 7, 1971. Walter's eyes narrowed just slightly. You were. Bravo unit? I was the last one still breathing when the evac arrived. Your map got us there. Walter gave a faint nod. Didn't know who made it out. You didn't wait to find out, Reeve said. You handed it over and disappeared. I wasn't there for recognition. You should have been, the general said, his voice tightening. This country owed you more than silence. Walter didn't respond. Because silence was what he'd lived in. Reeve turned, faced the room like he was addressing a formation. To anyone wondering what's happening, he began, you just questioned a man whose work saved 36 American lives, including mine. The statement struck the floor like an explosion. This is not a veteran looking for pity. This is a man whose name exists in a vault of classified files and forgotten acts of valor. A man who never asked to be honored, but deserves it more than any of us. He turned to Doyle. You mocked him, Doyle stammered. Generally didn't know. The paper shiz ID looked old and... Of course they're old, Reeve snapped. Because they're real. He was mapping enemy lines while your biggest concern was setting up a LinkedIn profile. The general gestured, and one of his aides stepped forward, opening the black case. Inside was a box of dark velvet, and resting inside, polished and gleaming, was a military-commissioned replica of the original TR-17 field map Walter had drawn. Folded beside it was a Medal of Merit. Reeve lifted the medal gently, his hands unusually careful for someone who had broken bones and fired rifles. This was approved 23 years ago, but no one could find you. No address, no paper trail. Wasn't trying to be found, Walter said. Reeve nodded. That's the problem with heroes like you. You do your job too well, and vanish. He held the medal out. Walter didn't reach for it. He looked around the room at the shocked teller, at the manager with sweat forming at his temple, at the guard who now stood with his hand over his heart and, for a moment, just a second, his jaw tightened. I didn't come here for this, Walter said. I know, Reeve replied. You came for what you left behind. Walter turned to Elena. Box 70, 2C, he said softly. She gave a firm nod and turned to Harold, who was already unlocking the rear security door. Wordlessly, they walked toward the vault together, Walter, Elena, and Reeve. Doyle didn't stop them. He couldn't. Inside the old vault, room lined with brass drawers and forgotten history, Harold opened box 72C. Walter reached in and removed a bundle wrapped in oiled cloth. He placed it gently on the nearest table and peeled back the layers like opening a casket. Inside was the original hand-drawn map. Ink faded, paper browned at the edges, but every line still intact. Elena gasped. Reeve's aide immediately began scanning it with reverence. Walter stared at it, quiet. His fingers hovered just above the parchment. There's a mark here, Elena said softly, pointing near a hand-drawn ridge. Coordinates. I've seen this on a recon overlay before. Walter nodded. It wasn't just a path out. It was a burial site. 6 of them didn't make it. They deserved to be found. Reeve turned slowly. We never knew. Now you do, Walter said. And that's all I needed. He closed the cloth, placed it back in the box, and finally looked the general in the eye. I didn't come here to be remembered. Reeve nodded slowly. And yet, you reminded all of us what service really looks like. When Walter Dean stepped back into the main lobby of the bank, he wasn't walking alone anymore. General Reeve walked at his side. The vault team followed closely, carrying the sealed box like a sacred artifact. But the atmosphere had changed. No longer sterile and transactional, now the air felt charged, reverent. Something had cracked beneath the marble floors and fluorescent lights, something deeper than any protocol or policy. Respect. The kind that couldn't be demanded, only earned and long overdue. Every person in that bank who had watched Walter walk in with suspicion now stood a little taller. Even the customers who hadn't spoken a word, those who had chuckled quietly or looked away, seemed to sense they'd been witnesses to something bigger than bureaucracy. The same Connor who had laughed earlier now stood behind his terminal, eyes down, hands folded. He didn't speak. He didn't dare. Doyle remained by the counter, frozen, his tie now crooked and hands trembling slightly. He opened his mouth perhaps to apologize, but General Reeve raised a hand gently. "No need," he said quietly. "This isn't about you anymore." Walter approached the counter again, this time not with hesitation, but with the calm of a man who'd already survived the worst the world had to offer. "I'd like to access my funds," he said. "Still have some left in the old account, I hope." Harold smiled faintly from behind him. "Adjusted for interest. You'll have enough for what you need. Maybe even more." Reeve raised a brow. "What's the purpose, if I may ask?" Walter paused. Then, almost sheepishly, he pulled a folded envelope from his coat pocket. "Granddaughter's starting college next month," he said. "She thinks it's just a gift. She doesn't know it comes from a jungle trail and a compass held together with wire." Reeve chuckled softly. "She'll know one day." "No," Walter said. "She doesn't have to. That's the point." The teller handed him a receipt, hands shaking slightly. Walter took it without comment, folded it once, and slipped it into the same pocket where he kept the key. As he turned to leave, Reeve gently placed a hand on his shoulder. "Colonel," he said, "you've got 5 minutes." Walter raised an eyebrow. 5 minutes for what?" The general simply stepped back, nodded toward the lobby. And without a single word of command, something extraordinary happened. The man with the Marine Corps sticker stood and snapped to attention. A woman near the ATM placed her hand over her heart. Even civilians who had never served straightened their backs, not out of obligation, but from instinct, from recognition, from something older than politics and louder than medals. Elena stood tall, one hand behind her back, the other clenched in a respectful fist near her chest. Walter looked around. He froze, not in pride, not in vanity, in disbelief. Then, slowly, he returned the salute. Quietly, precisely, without flourish. Because once upon a time, that was all he had. Reeve stepped forward again, reaching into his coat. From a velvet case, he retrieved one final item. A coin engraved, not with rank or branch, but with 3 simple words beneath Walter's name. "Service beyond record." He placed it in Walter's palm. "We've been holding this," Reeve said. "Didn't think we'd ever get to deliver it." Walter stared at it, turning it slowly with his thumb. He said nothing. No tears. No speeches. Just a single nod, like a man finally closing a door no one else even knew had been open. Then he walked out into the morning light. And this time, no one questioned his steps. The following Monday, something appeared near the front entrance of First Patriot Bank. It wasn't flashy. There was no press release, no ribbon-cutting ceremony, no media coverage. Just a small, brushed bronze plaque, mounted on the wall to the right of the door, easily missed if you weren't looking for it, impossible to ignore once you saw it. It read, "Col Walter Dean, TR-17 Reconnaissance Division. Service beyond record." No explanation. No photograph. Just a name, a title, and a truth. Employees passed it with quieter footsteps that morning. Even Doyle, red-eyed and unusually punctual, paused to look at it before unlocking the side office. Connor didn't wear his earpiece that day. He kept his phone in his pocket. Harold, now suddenly being treated like a man with stories rather than just years, found a fresh pot of coffee already brewing when he walked in. No one said much. But everything had changed. Customers who stepped inside that week seemed to sense it too. They looked around longer. They spoke with more care. They read the plaque. Some asked questions. Others simply stood in silence, like they were listening for something the building itself had been waiting to say for years. Elena Morales returned the following Friday, not for business, but to quietly slide a folded letter into Box 72C, now officially reassigned to the Department of Military Archives. She didn't sign her name. Just 6 words. "You reminded us how to stand." As for Walter Dean, he never returned. He didn't need to. His granddaughter received a tuition check with no explanation, and a small note that read, "For the path ahead. Love, Grandpa." She never knew what it cost him. Only that somehow it always arrived when it mattered most. Somewhere, in a museum archive beneath Fort Cumberland, A yellowed map now sits under glass surrounded by red string, faded photographs, and a citation file marked Recovered Artifact, Legacy Tier Clearance. And in the hearts of those who were there that day, whether they stood tall or stayed seated done, thing remains. You don't always know when history is walking into the room, but when it does, you feel it. The story of Walter Dean offers more than just a moment of justice. It delivers a quiet, enduring lesson about how we measure worth in a world that often forgets to look beneath the surface. In an age obsessed with credentials, appearance, and digital presence, Walter reminds us that true value often walks in quietly, carrying nothing but memory, humility, and purpose. He didn't demand attention, he didn't seek applause. He showed up with a promise to keep and a legacy no one recognized until it stood still long enough to be seen. This story teaches us to listen more carefully, to slow down before we judge, to understand that greatness often hides in plain sight inside old coats, behind trembling hands, beneath faded names etched in brass. It also reminds us that honoring someone's past is not just an act of respect, it's an act of repair, a way of telling the next generation, this is what integrity looks like. Walter Dean didn't come to be remembered, but in showing up for someone else, he became unforgettable. Because service, in its truest form, is never about being noticed. It's about never turning away, especially when no one else is watching.